Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with Cindy van den Bremen. Thank you for joining me. Did I pronounce the name right?
Yeah.
Close enough?
Thanks for inviting me, Edwin.
Oh, great. Well, I'm really looking forward to this dialogue about your empathic designer. I just have some from your website. I saw here it says you work as works independent from her studio in CVD Bremen in Eindhoven as an empathic designer with an expertise in cultural diversity, and that you teach at the Technical University. And there's more in terms of introduction you'd like to share about yourself?
Um, I'm teaching at the Design Academy as well in Eindhoven, a
Oh,
renowned design institute. And I also have established a capsters company, which was actually built upon the graduation project of the sports headscarves for Muslim women.
oh yeah, wow. Well, in terms of the design school there, I'd actually given a talk a while back. I was
Oh, really?
online, and they did a whole, I think it was like a 2-day conference there in Eindhoven I mean, it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and they were doing a whole conference on empathy. I don't know if you were there.
I wasn't. I was too busy. I'm sorry. There's so much going on, even in my hometown, that I miss.
Mhm. Well, I also wanted to share your website. I can share it on the screen here and just show it. Can you just share if anyone wants to check out the URL, it's CV Bremen. Yeah, so it's,
DBremen.nl. Yeah.
so yeah, here it is on the screen, so anybody can go there and check it out. And so just to show that, so yeah, so great. It's really great to talk to you because I've really become interested in design, and empathic design is a way of not only designing, but using it as a way to create more empathy. So design for more empathy. And so I wanted to just hear about what's the work that you've been doing around empathy and design, and how did you get started with that?
Yeah, well, maybe I have a very good example in reference to my graduation project. I graduated back in 1999 from the Design Academy in Eindhoven, and that was on the subject of covering, so women covering for sports. And at that time, there was no such thing as a sports hijab. The hijab is the Arabic word for headscarf. And I stumbled upon a court case. A girl in the Netherlands got expelled from gym class due to her supposedly unsafe hijab. And the mother tried to solve the issue by sewing the hijab. And later in court, it was even demonstrated that with this sewn hijab, there was no danger by doing a rollover. Nevertheless, this was the first time in the Netherlands that the court opposed against the hijab wearer. And it was decided that in case the teacher opposes, the hijab could be forbidden in gym class due to safety reasons. And this was a bit strange, I think, because if it's really dangerous, then I think you should state that it should be prohibited for all gym classes. Nevertheless, you leave it up to a subjective decision of the gym teacher. So what happened is they actually gave an alternative to these girls related in this issue. And they said the girls could wear a swimming cap and a turtleneck instead. And at this time, I was really interested in the subject of veiling because I wanted to turn it into my graduation project. Nevertheless, I hadn't stumbled upon something that I could really use as a designer. And this was actually the thing that asked for a designer, because I discovered by the alternative of the swimming cap and the turtleneck that it was not about the covering itself, but about the way the girls are covered. And that in Dutch, I would actually say it's not about it's actually about the shape, the vorm, and in Dutch, a designer is a form giver. So for me, I thought there was a task, and I think that has a lot to do with empathy, because when I started my research, I think out of the 6 months, 4 months I took in researching the matter of hijab without designing. And that's actually how I design. I place myself in the shoe of the other by researching everything from historical point of view, cultural point of view, meeting people face to face. Even though I'm a big talker, I love to talk. I also try to be a good listener. So all my work starts with listening to other people, and from there finding a solution. And actually, it was pretty remarkable because when I graduated, apparently I had stumbled upon a universal problem where I thought it was just helping out this Dutch girl and addressing a local or a national issue that is a social issue that I think should be discussed, and that clearly has a solution when you involve a designer. Now they call that popular design thinking, but I think this is an example of how the creative mind can help in social-related issues, and empathy is a big factor in that.
So you were seeing a social problem, and then you went there and started empathizing with the around that problem, and that's where what I'm hearing is that's where the solution emerged, through that really hearing all the different aspects of it, researching it.
Exactly. Well, what is lacking in court cases, or of course there's black and white in court cases because there needs to be right and wrong, but what I feel was lacking was that it was only considered from a safety issue and not from the identity issue that the girls are dealing with, or the religious or cultural issue. And I think it needs empathy in order to relate that to the girls and the question the girls are asking, because especially at that age, this was a high school girl, you don't want to walk in a swimming cap and a turtleneck in gym class amongst your peers, because it also deals with your appearance. Not only functionality, and apart from that, functionality is also bad because the swimming cap doesn't release the heat, so it's not safe, I believe. But so I think if you place yourself in the shoes of others, and from there making a list of demands and looking at the issue from both sides, so not only the safety issue that is that could be the reason why the teacher is opposing, because of course there are many other reasons why I think the teacher opposes. But if you put it really from those side of perspectives, both perspectives, I believe that there is a middle ground. And I feel as a designer I could be the bridge builder, or negotiator even, by negotiating through form or through solutions or through a process even. Lately I'm involved in a lot of processes in deprived neighborhoods, so it's not so much about form giving, but more about how you approach social issues.
I hadn't thought about that. That's really, for me, a unique idea, is that a designer is almost like a mediator. It's you're like a mediator, but bringing in creativity as well to create solutions.
Yeah, and I think it's confirmed by afterwards. After I graduated, there was a lot of publicity. It started on national level and then international level, and now I have an international business selling this hijab worldwide. I would never have imagined 15 years ago. I mean, if you would have told me I would sell hijabs, sports hijabs worldwide, not wearing hijab myself, not being a Muslim myself, I would have laughed at you. And I even published a book about it, and I give presentations about it. I write articles about it through empathy, because I think by my fresh vision, by being an outsider actually, and looking from my profession into the subject, into the matter, it gives new perspectives. And to give you an example of how it is perceived, after graduation, there was a graduation show in Amsterdam, and I had, because at that time, this was 15 years ago, now we progressed a lot in the hijab discussion here in Western Europe. But at that time it was a very hot topic, and actually everybody opposed, because it was against women's rights and it was oppressing. While at that time I had spoken to so many women who felt they were neglected in their rights because they demanded the right to wear a hijab, which actually increased after 9/11 because it became even more part of their identity. And the girls in the community that I'm involved in now, and it gives me feedback on the Facebook page, for example, from Capsters. We have about 9,000 followers there. Most of them are well educated and very outspoken young women. It's a total different image than 15 years ago, what I was fighting here in the Netherlands. So when I graduated, my main aim was not so much presenting my work, but more presenting the topic of veiling in the Netherlands, because there were many court cases at that time. And there was a guy, I think he was about 70, and he came up to me, and I had all these sketches, and I had the final designs, and I had a video that I actually used as an inspiration on the topic of hijabs. And he approached me in a very, how do you say that? He was a bit not so pleased, not so amused. And he said, I want nothing to do with hijabs, but what you're doing is good. And then he took off, and I was flabbergasted, because actually I wanted to have a conversation with everybody who approached me, because I wanted to convey the message of free choice. As you can see, I'm not wearing a hijab myself. I believe it should be the women's choice. I'm against prohibiting the hijab, because it takes away the right of the woman to choose. And I'm also against forcing it upon women, because then there's no right to choose either. But this man took off, and then I thought, actually, he gave me the biggest compliment. I mean, the fact that I'm still sharing this story after 15 years says a lot, because my work, actually, my designs, my 4 designs at that time, communicated very clearly the message that I wanted to convey, and that it was not about the veiling, but about the way you're veiling, you're covering yourself, and also how you could, as a designer, connect through design the hijab through with the appearance, total appearance of the girl, so it matches her identity, and it also says something different than a traditional hijab. I can talk for hours on the matter of hijabs. I don't know if you want.
So well, that's the other part is wanted to kind of focus on is the empathy part. Is you're doing a master class. It's called you call it the necessity of empathy. I could just read a few things that in the description. It says, designing is the ability to empathize with others. As the title would assume, this lecture and workshop focused on empathy and the necessity of added value of empathy in co-design process. How does empathy help you in co-design projects? How do you apply it, and how would it be an inspiration in your concept development? And so this whole issue of diversity and empathy seems to be central to what you're kind of organized yourself around. It seems like you're trying to promote empathy as well.
Yes, actually, because a few years ago, my website stated a phrase that I wanted to inform others of stories of others in a way they would be appealing to them. Because I don't know if you know a bit about the Dutch politics, but there have been a few guys here in the Netherlands, right-wing parties, who have been very much opposing the Islam and Muslims, and of course the hijab. And it frustrates me, because I'm the one talking to these women, and that's why I also feel from when I graduated that I'm sort of an ambassador of free choice, because actually I'm not wearing a hijab. I'm not preaching for my own community. I'm actually sharing the message that I hear. And I get very frustrated if I hear these politicians, because most of them are invited by these communities to have a conversation, but they're only interested in one-liners and in popular phrases, and actually don't want to get to know the other. And I think, well, I'm an idealist. I call myself a realistic idealist, but actually, for me, it all comes down to the same. We're all human. And I've seen many projects where that's the starting point, and they inspire me, because if for example, there's these television series in the Netherlands where teenagers exchange houses for a week, and they get rid of all their prejudice just by seeing that all the people are actually the same and they're dealing with the same things as they are. And for me, that's actually the basis of life and my work and my personality. My husband sometimes gets angry with me because he says, "You're not on my side. You're always thinking about the other person." Yeah, because if we come to an intersection and he doesn't get the right to yield, then I think, oh, maybe that other person is upset or has a problem, instead of getting angry like he is. So yeah, I think in a way it's part of your personality, and in another way, I think through this masterclass I can show you what the benefit of empathy can have. And it's funny because one of my colleagues from the university joined me in the masterclass, and he came back to me saying he already applied the knowledge in real life, because actually one of the main messages from the masterclass is that you have to find a common ground, actually what I've been talking about to you in the last few examples. And if you find this common ground, then empathy arises, because you can place yourself on the other person because you have this common ground. Grief, for example, or yeah, you name it. And
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm always looking for this common ground in conversations to. Actually, if this wasn't an interview about me, my first question to you would be, why are you so interested in empathy? And then immediately we would get to the common ground. To give you an example of yeah.
Well, I had the same experience with my girlfriend here, or my partner, that I like to watch on the political. I like to watch the Democrats and the conservatives, or the progressives, and I like to listen to all sides. And she comes through the room and she sees me listening to the conservatives, and I say, well, you have to listen and hear what it is that they're saying. You know, you have to empathize with them. And she gets really mad. It's very similar to your husband. Says, "You're not on my side." You know, they're terrible people.
But actually, the best politicians are the people. And I think Obama is. I think I read an article somewhere that why he became so popular at such a young age and also accepted by the Republicans is because the fact that he always, in conversations leading up to his position now, had an ear for the other side. So instead of ignoring the other side, he always approached them to ask what they wanted and how they could find this common ground. So yeah, that's an inspiration for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's mine too. In fact, what about the common ground being empathy itself? That it seems to me like we have this terrible divide in the United States with the Republicans and the Democrats, that if they were both valuing empathy, that becomes the common ground, and it's almost like a gateway to all the other problems or other needs that people have. So that's what I'm looking at, is how do we create empathy as a common ground? And I say, well, we need empathy as a common ground. And they say, no, we don't want that. And I say, well, let me empathize with you about why you don't want empathy to be the common ground.
I think you can take it even larger than that, because I think if empathy would be the main treasure of people, there wouldn't be war. Because you can always place yourself in the story of the other, and you have to solve it by listening to each other. And of course, I know this is all idealistic and will never happen. Nevertheless, I believe in the masterclass I have this great video of the Empathy Museum. I forgot the title, but it's in the documents that I sent you, I think. Mm-hmm. It's an animation about how you could teach people empathy, and it's about opening empathy museums by experiencing what the other person has gone through. And what's interesting is that a lot of social issues, of course, are political related, and therefore my work is very difficult to separate from politics. making it very difficult because not everybody wants to empathize with the other for many reasons. Power, money. Yeah, but this is more a meta meta discussion.
Yeah, it's a good. We can go anywhere we want with this. You look. What I'm hearing is it's the kind of from the meta level that looking at empathy, that there's all kinds of reasons that people don't want to empathize, and reasons of power and so forth. And it kind of really fits into the question. My question is, how do we build an empathic culture? So how do we build? And I'm actually looking at design as a methodology for how do we build an empathic culture. So there's the phrase often is empathic design too. I mean, human-centered design is sometimes called empathic design, or design empathy. So it seems to me that that's a methodology to work at creating a more empathic culture, and that's why I'm really interested in talking with designers who are interested in empathy and design.
I think what's happening now in the Netherlands, and maybe we're a bit behind from Scandinavia, for example, because that's where it all started with the co-design, is that for me there's no other way of designing with the people, for the people. So it used to be that designers would sit behind their tables finding solutions for other people. So now, actually at the university also, in the design schools, we're encouraging people students to pick up on these social problems, and in order to understand the problems, to become part of the problem, by living in a certain area, or by experiencing things that that people are coping with. And I think, well, maybe I should take you back to my days as a student. When I graduated, I was very impressed by the story of this design. I think it was an American designer, a lady. She wanted to know what it was like to be 80 years old, and she designed a suit which enabled her, not enabled, but enabled her to make certain moves. And she actually traveled around the States. And she became an expert in advising designers and companies in designing for the elderly. Now, in my eyes, this is a perfect example on how empathy can work, and how we as a designer are the creatives, the translators, or the bridge builders. There's another word for that, I can't find it now. But I hope we can inspire other disciplines as well, and I do see that design thinking, in a sense, is doing that, because now it's being taught at MBA studies as well. Though I also doubt that, even though you could see it as a methodology, you also need a creative mind in order to be a design thinker. But I think especially this interdisciplinarity can enable us to use empathy maybe more as a tool even, and expand improvements. Yeah, there was also another guy who graduated right before when I started the Design Academy in the 90s. His name was Ine ten Haven. He's a Dutch guy, and there was actually a picture of his graduation project in the computer room. Now this was back in the days we had Ataris, I believe. And I asked what it was, and it was a prothese. I don't know what the English word for it is. A prothese, replacement of your leg.
Oh, okay.
When your leg is cut off. How do you call that?
Prosthesis. Yeah.
Prosthesis. Okay, yeah. And it was actually made of local materials meant for war victims, I think, in Africa. And what he did, he actually looked at local sources, local solutions, and not money-driven, but solution-driven. And actually, the whole debate at that time at the Design Academy was whether this was design or not. And that formed or shaped me as a designer, because I got furious when I heard about that, because I thought that was the best solution a designer could come up with.
Yeah, so I didn't quite understand that. You're saying that he was really looking at local materials and then designing with local materials, and then other designers were saying that that wasn't a good way to do it, or
Well, at that time, design had to be slick and money driven,
oh, I see. Okay.
and so worrying about the other 90%, as there is a project now. Have you heard about that? It was actually an exhibition in the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in New York. I think about 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, and it became now also a foundation, so you could look it up, Design for the Other 90%. And it actually deals with solutions that are not design driven in a commercial kind of way, but stating that actually we're only designing as designers for a small part of the Western capitalized world. And the examples that are shown there are really interesting, and I use them as an inspiration for my students.
Oh, I see. So yeah, that was my sense too, as I've been looking at design. Like, I'm not coming from a design background, but I've been just coming from an interest in expanding empathy, and I've just come to design to say, hey, this is a methodology and a set of tools that can really work at creating more empathy in the world too. And it's a bit self-reinforcing, since design starts with empathy. At least human-centered design starts with empathy to create, solutions to problems. That it can also be used to create more empathy itself, be more directed at its own self in that sense. And that design, I think what you were addressing is design started from, well, let's create, a more detached, creating products for others, slick products. That it's the methodology is moving into education and social innovation, into actually designing processes and systems and values. So it seems to be moving, kind of expanding in how it's being applied.
Yeah, and there's also concern in the more traditional design scene about whether I'm designing or not, especially since I'm not always giving form, literally, or shape to things. Sometimes I shape communities or I shape a process. So the question that is discussed here in the design community is, what is a designer? And is that still design? And actually, I don't want to be bothered with a question like that, because for me, what I'm doing is necessary and is logical. And yeah, for me, there's no other way of doing it. Nevertheless, I do know that there's many of my colleagues who are wonderful form givers and shape givers, and I admire their passion to, and yeah, and their, how do you say it, their talent to just design the shapes around us that are still necessary.
And you're looking at even going more, I guess, more deeply into designing identities and relationships and
yeah, I've always had the urge to work multidisciplinary. At the moment, I'm working with an architect, which is not that far-fetched from design, of course. But the multidiscipline approach creates empathy for me as well, because, for example, now I'm working in an area where my studio is actually located in my own hometown, and it's both about the people but also about the buildings, because the designer is the municipality. And I always look at the neighborhood from a personal perspective, so from eye level to eye level. But architects have a tendency to look at a area from the top, or yeah, from a map. And this also changed a bit the way I look at the people living there, and vice versa. So in that sense, we empathize with each other by exchanging this disciplinary view, which I think increases the benefits of the project. Or maybe this sounds a bit abstract.
No, not at all. It's actually very empathic in the sense that there's all these people with different viewpoints, perspectives on the community, and hearing all the different viewpoints, the overview, the eye view, maybe even the child's view,
Exactly.
the dog's view, the mother's view, the father's view. I mean, hearing all the different perspectives really helps you to design a better community.
Environment, yeah.
Environment, yeah, better environment. Well, you had, you had a class. You're doing that master class. Could you give a little bit of an overview of the a class? I see, like, I think I've got it here up on. I can put it up on the screen. This was just a screenshot of.
Oh yeah, if we walk right through it, I could shortly say something about it.
Okay.
What I actually did is I let the people work with the empathy map, the Stanford empathy map. By making duos, I hid objects in envelopes that were very confronting. For example, a condom or a tampon or a syringe. So these were in an envelope, and a duo had to take off in a corner and to open the envelope and discuss the object.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were so confronting and related to you as a person, stories derived from this. And these were people that never met each other. And then after this session, we came back, and everybody was very pleased, but also surprised about how far everybody was willing to share their personal stories. Even me, I came up with the assignment, but I was very surprised with the stories that were put on the table. I also showed some examples. Well, actually, I started with some examples from my work to show how I apply empathy as a designer. And by the Stanford Empathy Map, I try to inspire others to do it. It's about writing down from a conversation what people say, what you think they think, what they said they did, and what you think they feel. And I'm not working with the Stanford Empathy Map, but it's a great tool to capture a story. And what I do at the studio is I always capture the stories, mostly in my head, because I have a very great memory in that sense, but also in writing. And I use a lot of quotes and phrases in my projects from these stories that I start in the beginning. After they worked in duos, I showed a few videos that you can find on the internet. If you have these reports, there's links to these videos that give examples of how you could create empathy. And very touching examples also. And I finished with this animation of the I think it's the RSI or RSA Empathy Museum animation. And it actually calls to action to design a museum. Well, actually, I made it into an assignment. So they had to form teams. And they had to talk about what social issue they wanted to address, or what issue they wanted to address, and how they would build a museum around it so people could experience the problem or the issue. And then they had to present this to each other.
Mm-hmm. And how did it go? What was the, would you say was the overall experience?
Yeah, what was interesting is that people were, because for me it's so natural that empathy is part of my work. Many people were, because I had questionnaires afterwards asking them what they liked most, and what was surprising is that many people went home with a new vision on empathy, and I think half the crowd was designer, maybe even more. So I was a bit surprised myself to see how empathy is not yet part of a design vocabulary, apparently. So there's work to do. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you could also say, yeah, that distinguishes me from others. But yeah, I feel that it helps. What I said already, the co-design process asks for empathy, because without empathy, you cannot co-design, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been doing, put together a team, we call it the Empathy team, and we're doing this IDEO course, IDEO and Acumen Fund. They put on this free course, and we had a team of 6, and it grew to 8 people, and we were looking at how do we create more empathy in the world. And we met for almost 12 weeks, and
Oh, wow.
and yeah, I have a link to it. I can send you the link.
Yeah. What was the result?
Well, it's like when I started the project, I mean, this would be great to get your feedback on it. Like I had done a previous workshop on empathic design, and I found that it was hard to inspire people to come to it, to be inspired, to be interested in empathy. So I started off with the design challenge, how might we inspire people to cultivate their empathy? Then this team came together, and they kind of explored the topic, and then the theme went off totally different to how do we design empathic experiences, and it felt like it became very broad and kind of ethereal. So we're talking about the nature of empathy and all that.
I think what the feedback on the masterclass was good, so I'm not bragging here, but I think what the essence of the masterclass was that actually by the first exercise, a very small exercise, it immediately became apparent how easy it is to find a common ground. And I'm not using envelopes myself in my conversations. Of course, I'm not approaching someone with a condom saying, hey, can we talk about this? Mm-hmm. But it was a nice metaphor of if you don't have, see, for me, when I have projects, I always have something to talk about because it's either the assignment by my assigner or my interest myself, or just the neighborhood that I'm exploring or working in. So I always have something to start a conversation with. But if you don't have it, it works very good to just start with a object and use that. So center the conversation on the object instead of each other. In that sense, you're not philosophizing about empathy, mm-hmm. but you're exploring empathy. And I think that's it works.
So having a more tangible, smaller object you can look at and explore versus a philosophizing about it.
Empathy works when you feel it, and you can discuss about it in a lot of ways, but I think we know exactly what empathy is once we feel it, once we recognize it. And I think that is much easier done than making it bigger than necessary.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Well, that was my sense too. Is that the challenge especially in a learning process, needs to be. My sense was it needs to be pretty focused in a narrow, more specific challenge. That it, at least as we're learning. I mean, there's narrow challenges versus medium versus large, and that was my sense. I was moving towards let's get a very narrow challenge to begin with, to start with.
Yeah, to frame it, actually.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, the thing we ended up with was, okay, how do we do empathic interviews? And then it became, well, in doing an interview, we need to be more centered and create more centeredness in the interview. So we ended up designing a series of breathing cards on how to take breaths while you're doing, and you can pull out this thing. So now as I'm interviewing you, that I might be getting anxious about the direction or whatever, it's like, okay, stop and breathe, and then we can breathe together with the interviewee. Let's breathe together. So that was actually where it kind of ended up as a kind of a prototype of some cards.
Okay, sounds interesting. Well, I also noticed myself that you talk about interviewing. I work with a lot of interns, and they are always surprised about the length of the time that I take for people in the conversations in the neighborhoods. But the reason why I do that is also to gain trust, and I cannot gain trust if I don't expose myself vulnerable. So I always have to talk, not always, but I often expose myself in a vulnerable way, a human way, reducing myself to another citizen, just like they are. Mm-hmm. So they know that I understand them, instead of this professional high-end designer that knows everything. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, And I think that's also in interviewing. If you're opening up, the other person will open up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's yeah. So that's part of the interview, is that if you can share yourself and be open, it kind of creates an open relationship, and they'll feel more comfortable being open as well.
Exactly,
So
because
that's nice.
empathy is also about the gaining of trust. Because I decide how much I show of myself to you, and it might not be enough for you to empathize with me.
Mm. Well, what I'm doing now is, are you familiar with the Hub? I don't know if they have them. There's these co-working spaces, and they're in like 50 cities or more, I don't know, around the world. Have you
Yeah, I
heard of
heard
them?
about it. Yeah.
And they have one here in Oakland, and that's where we were meeting, and then I won a free membership there for a year. So now I'm kind of doing a project on how do we raise the level of empathy at the Hub.
Oh,
So that's my design challenge. And I've been trying things like having an empathy listening station. So I set up a sign that says free empathy, and people can come and I will
I
listen.
think
And
I saw. I think I saw that image. I thought it was. Well, that reminds me of one of the movies that I showed during the masterclass. Is of a small how do you call it, interaction in America, and it's
uh,
a ballenbak. I don't know the word in English for it. Um, it's like a big bathtub filled with balls, and
oh,
children
okay.
swim in
Uh-huh.
them. And what they do, they put it in the middle of the street, so very unexpected, and inviting people, passengers by, to sit in this square thing for I think about 5 or 15 minutes with a total strangers trying to find the common ground. And so they put questions on these balls, and you can find the link. I think it's good to watch it. But they
I've
put these
seen it. Yeah,
questions
I know what
on.
you mean now.
Yeah, and it's remarkable to see how fast through these simple questions people find each other's common ground, and immediately there's like this spark, something happening, and it is as simple as that. So if you would ask me how we could bring more empathy to the world, it needs more of these interventions or reminders, maybe in
Mm-hmm.
public space.
Mm-hmm. So kind of spaces for dialogue to happen, and
Yeah, but not that.
so,
Usually, dialogue is maybe also political because
mm-hmm.
it's about perspectives, and this is much. It's more about getting to know the other person and starting
Mm-hmm.
from there, learning from another perspective. Because when you're in dialogue, you're already aware of your perspective and the other perspective.
Well, I'm looking at doing an empathy workshop there at the Hub in November, so I need to design that. But what I was interested in doing was the co-design. In terms of, I mean, as I understand co-design, is that initially the idea was you had a designer, they're kind of having a bit of a distance from the people they're designing from, and then the co-design is that the designer is sort of like the facilitator, facilitating the design and the dialogue and the work, the cooperation between a group that they will design together. So it's facilitating the group who maybe not designers, who are not like professional designers, but that they're facilitating them to work together to design some kind of solutions or
Yeah, well,
projects.
there's different definitions on co-design. You can find many of them. Um, in my perspective, it is about indeed the changing role of a designer and acknowledging the fact that the users or your target group, or there's many words for that, are the experts and not
Mm-hmm.
you. And I think it's also about humbleness because in the past many designers have designed from their ivory tower and their drawing tables, coming with marvelous prototypes costing a fortune, testing the product and finding out that it was not that product that the people were need, but it's something totally different. But when you're that far in the process, it's difficult to say, hey, this is not what they want. So it's also involving the user in a far much earlier stage. And actually, I always say that the beginning of my project is re-asking the questions, because usually the designer comes to me with a question, but I always dare to ask questions to my assignment whether that's the right question to be asked. And that actually is the starting point. And you cannot do that without the people you're designing for, whether that's a neighborhood or a final user. It's actually about the humbleness of the designer. And I know there's not a lot of agreement in the design world in this sense, because some designers do feel that they have a different role. And I think it's fine because everybody has their own expertise. But please acknowledge the different roles a designer can play.
Well, where do you see your work going now around empathy and co-design and so forth?
What I like is that the first few years, immediately after my graduation, I started working for myself. I started my studio. And what I see happening is, in the beginning, I was really with my, as we say, it's a Dutch expression, with my boots in the mud. I don't know if you have an expression like that in English, but it actually means that you know the work with your own bare hands. So I've been working with local women behind sewing machines, sewing products we sold on the local markets, addressing a lot of social issues in that area and using design as a tool for economic improvement, for social improvement, for cultural improvement. And because of that experience, I feel I'm more the director now of these kind of projects, preferring to work with creatives that I assign with doing these smaller projects that are under this bigger umbrella. In that sense, I feel I'm moving up to legislation. No, that's not legislation, beleid. I don't know what I had Google Translate open, but I closed it because it took a lot of the speed away. Beleid.
So is that like policy, or?
Yeah, policy, exactly.
Okay.
And it's I find it very pleasing to work now, for example, with people from the municipality, social housing corporations, because then in that way you're not working small scale, but you can actually make a difference. Nevertheless, it remains small steps. I had a coach in the past who asked me if I didn't have any political aspirations. Sometimes I doubt, because of course I'm politically driven. Nevertheless, I feel as a designer I can do much more than just being a politician. So that means I'm staying on the ground.
Well, one thing I'm looking at is, it seems to me that there's a need for like a cultural value, like an explicit cultural value of empathy. Like in America, everybody talks about, well, you know, it's about happiness, it's about freedom, it's about liberty, it's about justice. But it seems to me it would be good to have a cultural value that says, have an explicit value in some way that says, we value empathy, and we want to work at fostering that value in society. And I'm wondering what you think about that in terms of, I don't know if, you know what I mean, it's almost like in terms of legislation or a policy that's like an explicit saying that this is what we value. So
it's
we
mandatory.
Have,
yeah. I would, yeah, I like that. I second that. Actually, when I coach my students at the university or in guest lectures or workshops, I always encourage them to, for example, become an exchange student, like I was. I was an exchange student to the United States when I was a teenager, and I did a lot of internships in foreign countries, and that turned me into the expert of cultural diversity I am right now, because studying is something else than experiencing. And living somewhere is different than visiting as a tourist. And I think it broadens your mind, and especially as a creative person, it's almost mandatory to have that broader perspective. I teach a subject at the university, intercultural awareness, and I base it on design examples, and how there are design examples that only can be thought of by empathizing with the situation or the location or whatever the situation might be. And again, empathy or placing yourself in the other person's shoes is the starting point. Without that, you cannot design such marvelous projects. And luckily, more and more examples started coming up, because in the beginning, when I started teaching this subject, it was really hard because my students felt it was a bit abstract, and I had little examples of others to show. And luckily, it becomes more easy to show visuals and design examples of what I mean. Well, so yes, in a sense, I feel actually, I wish everybody could be an exchange student. And actually, the organization that I went with is a volunteer-based organization, YFU Educational Exchange. And it was actually started from the ideology from a woman who started to exchange German teenagers with American host families after the war, after the Second World War. And because she believed these are the leaders of tomorrow. And to move on, they need to understand that both sides are human. I was raised by an expression my father kept saying to us, don't do upon others what's done upon you. So almost all the things I do, I try to realize if I'm not hurting others by doing that. And I wish that it could be taught in school, like you say, as a value, as part of society.
Yeah, there's a big effort here. I mean, starting with Ashoka, they have an initiative for fostering empathy in the school, making it an explicit value, and we have a big program called startempathy.org. So really need they see that there's a need for making it a foundational skill or value within schools. So that's kind of an exciting.
Have you heard about the program Cross the Line?
I know the process Cross the Line.
Yeah.
That's
in schools, and it has been a television show here in the Netherlands as well, which is very good perceived.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've been going for a while now. I don't want to keep you too long. Is there any final thoughts you have that you feel is important to share? I mean, I could talk with you for hours because this is my favorite topic, and design and empathy. I mean, I'm in heaven. So, but.
Well, it's approaching midnight over here.
Oh no! Okay.
Not that late, but it's in the afternoon after a long day work. I believe you should stop at the top of the conversation.
Okay,
let's hope we reach that. Mm-hmm. I have nothing to add. Actually, I hope that your viewers can also look into the empathy report of the class, the link that you showed. And I hope through your network I can learn even more about others and how they implement empathy, and I would love to discuss with other people from your network as well. So let's keep in touch.
Okay, great. With that, I'll stop the broadcast.